Julius Malema and Floyd Shivambu have returned to the EFF presidency and deputy presidency after being nominated for positions of president and deputy president respectively at the party's second National People's Assembly at Nasrec, south of Johannesburg. Let's now bring in our reporter Natasha Phiri for more. Very good morning to you, Natasha. Some changes in the EFF top six. Talk us through that.
Well, very good morning to you, and of course to our SABC viewers, coming to you all the way from Nasrec. And of course today marks the third day of the EFF's National People's Assembly. For those who don't know and for those who just joined us on the show, of course we've got a new leadership, but of course we all know that the two main men of the party, particularly so Julius Malema, party president, has retained his position, followed by the deputy president Floyd Shivambu. And of course we've got four new members of the top six, namely the chairperson Veronica Mente, the SG Marshall Dlamini, the DSG Deputy Secretary General Popi Mailola, and of course the TG Ompile Mauti. But actually, to unpack more of this for us, we're joined by political analyst Angelo Fick. Always a pleasure having you on SABC. I mean, Angelo, it comes as no surprise that Julius Malema and Floyd Shivambu have retained their positions in the party. Just unpack what this actually means for the party itself.
So I think that the idea is continuity. So if we look at we listen to the way in which Godrich Gadi's report was about comparing Julius Malema to Robert Sobukwe, it is really for them about continuity and defying the attacks on the president of the party. And this is, I think, also where there are so many echoes with what we've seen happening inside the African National Congress a few years ago and what is happening inside the economic freedom fighters today or over the last few days. There are some leadership changes which indicate that the EFF does not want to repeat some of the so-called mistakes that were identified in the election of the top six officials of the governing party, but there are also some strategic changes around where members of the new leadership comes from, and what it is that they represent, and what does it mean, because I think many people would misread this as some kind of putsch. I think that there is something much more complicated going on. And this is not to say that this is not about how Floyd Shivambu and Julius Malema have a controlling interest in what goes on in the party, but it's also about continuity and kind of defying the attacks, which is not new in political parties in South Africa.
You speak about an important point, the organizational report that was tabled by the former SG, Godrich Gadi, basically alluding to the fact that the EFF wouldn't survive without Julius Malema. It's still at its formative stage. Are you of the same view?
Well, I think that Julius Malema in his own speech cautioned against personality cults, because we know that historically parties in South Africa that are centered around one individual have great difficulty surviving in the longer term. One party that defies that pattern is of course the Inkatha Freedom Party, which for a very long time had a very sort of powerful senior figure, and very little was known about very many other people in the ordinary South African imagination and imaginary. But we have seen parties where battles over personality and personality cults have seen to a kind of lack of, shall we say, handing on, and we've also seen parties down spiral if they're simply founded on one individual. Ahang SA is one example of that. The NFP is another example of that. And then parties where there have been contestations about leadership, like the Congress of the People, have seen a weakening of their electoral support precisely because that's a distraction. Whether or not one can agree as strongly with Godrich Gadi that the EFF could not survive without Julius Malema is not, I think, something that I think the party can bank on, because everybody is mortal and a party should be able to survive beyond the leadership of one figure.
Let's just talk about the other positions. I mean, it was highly contested, most of these positions. Let's talk about the position of the Secretary General. I mean, Marshall Dlamini came out on top. I think we all predicted that as media personnel. But you had a situation where Naledi Chirwa in the EFF, a young woman who's a firebrand leader, who'd actually nominated a woman like Mandisa Mashego, who's quite vocal, seen as quite a powerful figure within the EFF, but she didn't meet the threshold. What does this now mean? I mean, Marshall Dlamini also plays an important role within the party. Under him, KZN has actually grown in leaps and bounds. I think from an electorate of 30,000 to about over 500,000.
Yes, and also I think this has to do with experience in the party. So this is not Marshall Dlamini's first rodeo, so to speak. and he has a certain kind of, shall we say, presence. So there's a parliamentary record. It's his second term in the National Assembly. He served on several portfolio committees, and that kind of information I think is very useful, because if people sit on those parliamentary portfolio committees, they're not just there contributing or asking questions, they're also gleaning information that is very useful, because one gets to see what the governing party's agenda is, or agenda items are, and where they're sort of driving policy and where they're slipping up on accountability. And that information can be very useful inside a growing party like the Economic Freedom Fighters. The gender element, I think, is what many people are trying to focus on. But I imagine the EFF will have the response that the gender balance of the top 6 officials in their organization after this election reflects something about the party's agenda. I think we will have to wait and see how what we've seen over the last 24 hours about women inside the Economic Freedom Fighters complaining about treatment, whether that is a general pattern that persists, whether it bears out what we've seen, what's happened before, or whether it is a sea change for the party in the months ahead of the municipal elections in 2021. And so I think I'm one of those analysts who rather prefer to see what works itself out than to predict that if you have a woman in this position, you will have certain consequences, and if you have somebody like Marshal Dlamini over that of a young firebrand woman, you're likely to see different consequences. I think that the Secretary General and the Secretariat in general would have a certain function here, and that's balanced out by the DSG.
Okay, well, I'd like to have this conversation with you further. We're going to have to cross back to you in studio because there is breaking news coming in, and of course you will join us later on.
Thanks, Natasha. There